Welcome, everyone, to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and we're going to get you right to the action today. We have a very special guest, a friend of the show. If you know this show, you know him well. It's Keith Elliot Greenberg, and he's here to talk all about his new book on AEW. So let's talk to Keith. We are so glad to have a special guest with us today. He's a very good friend of the show, the best friend of the show, I'd say, and he's written another book. We've talked to him before. This new book is called This Book is All Elite, the inside story of all elite wrestling. Keith Elliot Greenberg, welcome back to Awesome Truth.
Hey, it's always good to hang out with you guys, either on air or off air.
That's right. We love it. Yeah, we appreciate it.
I just hung out with Walt last week.
Wow, jealous.
We were watching AEW together, so it's apropos. But the last time we hung out on this podcast specifically, on air, we were talking about another book, and that actually wasn't that long ago.
No, it was this year.
Yeah, it was a few months ago. So it's incredible turnaround between this current book and your last book. So let's just talk about what you've been up to since then and how this new project kind of got started and now that it's out in the world.
Sure. You want to talk about that? I could talk about it right now.
Let's talk about it.
Well, first of all, it's not like I finished the WrestleMania 3 book, which came out in March 2025, and then started the AEW book, which came out in November 2025 from scratch. I was involved in both assignments simultaneously. And the WrestleMania 3 book I had planned for a while. The AEW book came to me. AEW and Random House asked me to do that. And it's a coffee table. So as much as people like the writing, and I'm not demure about saying that my writing works. The book is so successful because of the art direction and the photography. I mean, it's a real coffee table. So, and that was about a third of the writing that my WrestleMania 3 book had in it. So it was easier to write and write fast because even though there's a lot of material and a lot of ground is covered, I didn't write 300 pages. I wrote more like 125 pages.
So interesting you said that they came to you. Did Random House know of your work and they're like, oh, this is a great candidate for this book?
Why would they go to anybody else?
I was going to say, I mean, just the amount of times we've had you on talk about wrestling books, you're probably the preeminent wrestling, author of our time, right? Well, in the conversation.
Dave Meltzer's written a bunch of things. And Dave Meltzer's definitely a prolific wrestling writer of our time. I mean, that newsletter.
He's not churning out books, though. You got books with, they're binded and everything.
But some of Meltzer's newsletters have come out in book form.
That's true.
But Brian Solomon, who wrote the book on the original Sheik, and he also wrote the great book that's out now on Gorilla Monsoon. Brian Solomon said, not just in terms of wrestling writers, but in terms of any writer in existence anywhere in the world, when you think about the amount of words in Dave Meltzer's newsletter weekly, there is probably nobody who has written more words that other people have seen than Dave Meltzer.
He's wild at this, but you're not doing too bad yourself, even though you said this one is not as lengthy as some of your other ones, but
No, but it does cover the first 5 years of AEW.
Sure. And that's what I wanted. That's perfect segue. I wanted to ask. It's we're 6 years in now. So I mean it's crazy how fast that's gone, and it feels like pretty recent, but 6 years is a hell of a lot of time objectively. What do you think? You wrote this book, you talked to people. What do you think about AEW's place in the industry, the progress they've made? As a somewhat objective observer, where do you think about where they stand in the grand scheme of things?
Am I objective? I mean, I've made money from WWE and AEW.
There you go. That's objective. You made money from everybody.
I mean, I guess if you're a pure journalist, supposedly you're not supposed to take money from any company, but I've taken money from both, so I guess that makes me a bit.
Exactly. Very even-handed.
So I would say that AEW's influence is pretty significant. And when you look at the state of WWE today, I mean, like, let's look at right now where we're recording this, it's December 2025. So, who are the champions in WWE? You have CM Punk and Cody Rhodes, both of whom were obviously in WWE before, but they probably would not be in this position were it not for their time in AEW. And then, even on the women's side, you have Jade Cargill and Stephanie Vaquer, who was a major star in Latin America. But the first time she ever received real North American exposure was through AEW, that one great match she did. And, I mean, Ricky Saints just dropped the NXT championship, but these are all people who came through AEW in order to get to where they are today in WWE. And I even think that both companies have influenced each other in terms of the way they present wrestling. I think that AEW, at one point, they were being criticized for their storytelling, and they've obvious that their storytelling has improved. I think they've probably looked to a degree, at least, to WWE. And then on the flip side, I would say WWE has definitely, you could argue, has stepped up its in-ring product. Not that it wasn't getting there, because those early NXTs that preceded AEW were pretty great. But I think they're both rubbing off on each other, and that's what competition is supposed to do. So I think it's a pretty cool time to be a fan.
I totally agree. And I think one of the things that is weird about it, and this is all primarily if you read things online, and I implore people not to read too many things online because there's a lot of horrible stuff out there and bad people. But you will hear people say, AEW is sort of, I feel like the general consensus sometimes is AEW is a perma runner-up. Like they the way they do it, it's not going to hit the mainstream. They don't do the presentation. They don't do a lot of things WWE does, and the implication there is, well, then they'll never overtake it or whatever. But I think that's
I don't know if the goal is to overtake.
I was going to say, and like also, I don't understand why that is our purview as wrestling fans. Like, why not enjoy the multiple, like you said, the competition, one encouraging the other implicitly or explicitly to do new things, to expand. Like, I don't see why anyone would complain about that. It's we haven't had it in so long until 2019.
Right. And, think about it. I mean, there have been like those long holiday weekends where you have an NXT show, you have an AEW show, you have a WWE show. And, now that I'm an older guy whose kids are adults and I'm not married anymore, well, I am legally married, but I haven't been in that relationship for since Obama was in the White House. I actually enjoy myself watching all of that wrestling on a weekend.
You've got the time for it sounds like.
I have the time for it.
Yeah, and also like just to speak of the wrestlers too, is like why if you are a fan of this industry, of this business, why would you not be excited about the multiple opportunities you described? Like all those shows means more money, more promotion for themselves, more chances to get out there and show their stuff. Like it's just a win for everybody.
Think about it from the wrestler's perspective. I mean, you have options. Obviously we've seen people who I just mentioned, Ricky Saints and Jade Cargill, and now Blake Monroe going over to WWE. Stephanie Vaquer. But then look at AEW. And Walt and I were discussing this when we were together. I mean, you have guys like Ricochet, who were, Tony Storm. Like these were all people who were in the WWE system. You have the Hurt Syndicate. I would even argue that Mercedes Moné is showing dimensions to her character and her in-ring character too, that I haven't really seen before. I always thought she was great and charismatic. So that means they're both having a good impact. And who benefits from that? The fans benefit from that. Sure, there are fans who, WWE fans, they don't have the time to watch other wrestling. They're not curious about other wrestling. They have their little fix of wrestling, and that's great. And, they're supporting the product. And then there are AEW fans who are some of them are very tribal and anti WWE. If you want to be that way, it's fine with me. I think it's a little silly since most people think as wrestling fans, we're kind of mutants anyway, that we should be, judging other wrestling fans. But if that's what, makes you happy, making fun of other wrestling fans in this little universe you've created for yourselves, be my guest.
I could think of no better term than mutant to describe us as wrestling fans.
Very Walt coded statement.
Yeah, I use the term Shreks, but what's the difference?
Shreks is a good one. Did you tell me a story once, Walter, it was your birthday, and you went to a show like at a bar to watch like a pay-per-view, and like it was all these like Shreks surrounding you?
I believe I was describing our friend's bachelor party where it's like, yeah, we went to watch it at a bar, and it's like, oh God, what did we just sign ourselves up for? And it's like 5 hours of sitting around a bunch of Shreks and Cena gear. I'm like, oh no, I'm so sorry.
Well, I mean, I think you've met him. I have a friend who's a neighbor of mine, and I doubt he would really care if I mentioned his name, but I'm not going to. And his father was, I may have even told you this story. He was like the first Black engineer to work in the U.S. space program. So this is like at a time when the country was still segregated. So this is a very accomplished man. At some point, my friend's father was like, "Yeah, I'm working all the time. Like, I should do something with you one-on-one. What would you like to do?" And they lived out in Seattle, and I think it's around 1980. And my friend goes, "Oh, I want to see Rip Oliver against Roddy Piper." And he says his father brings him to the arena, and it's all these fans just going mental. And Roddy Piper takes off his kilt and throws it in Rip Oliver's face. And my friend's like, "Isn't this great?" And his father's like, "I broke all of these barriers for you to join me, guys. This is what you want to be." He said his father looked like he was going to cry. Like, what have I done wrong?
Oh,
there's a parallel story very similar to what you just described, only talking about my dad taking me and my brother to an ECW show to see.
I was going to say, that's the only parallel we have, right? Is ECW.
The stockbroker taking his sons to like hear people saying, "Show your tits," and like bleeding all over him. So this is what my sons want to do? Like, what the hell is going on here?
My father did tell me that he ended up having a pretty good time.
I was going to say, it sounds great. It sounds like old time wrestling, like people really getting into it. Wanted to kill the heel. I love that stuff.
Well, switching gears back to AEW for a second.
Yeah.
Obviously in other books, like I'm sure the wrestlers you've talked to for at this point, like the Bucks are people you have a relationship with and interviewed in the past for Too Sweet. Your previous book about indie wrestling before AEW existed, or maybe it was right at the cusp of AEW.
Yes, no, it ends with AEW.
Right.
Man 2020, for those who don't know, called Too Sweet Inside the Indie Wrestling Revolution. And it's about the evolution of indie wrestling and how it got to this point where it was becoming a viable alternative. And it ends with it's Orange Cassidy, Jungle Boy Jack Perry. I forget who Marco Stunt, who's no longer around with the company. And who there's one other person, they're all getting, Joey Janela, I think. Yeah, Joey Janela. They're all getting in a car and they're driving down to the first Dynamite. And that's how the book ends. So I initially wanted to do a sequel that would be about that first year or two of AEW. And then COVID happened, and I ended up doing a book that's called Follow the Buzzards, pro wrestling in the age of COVID-19. So I kind of consider this book, that sequel, the AEW book, the sequel I wanted to do, except it's on the first 5 years. And COVID's a pretty big part of the AEW book.
Totally.
Too.
And like the people in this book, and like I'm sure you've talked to many times or several times in the past, and you know, in many ways, people see AEW, especially early on, as like an extension of like the best of the indies. And obviously, you have a lot of time in WWE. And I'm just curious, like, you know, what Steve brought up earlier about like, oh, fans say this about WWE, but this about AEW. But from your perspective, like what is your perspective of like the difference between like being on Team AEW as someone who knows these people more intimately and has spent time in both a WWE like backstage setting versus an AEW setting?
Well, Vince isn't around anymore, so that obviously creates a different
Sure.
dynamic. I mean, there's only one Vince, and look, I'm going to say there's only one Tony Khan, and if you're getting a push in either place and you're satisfied, I don't think it really matters that much. If you're sitting around catering, complaining, it doesn't matter which company you're in. You know, I mean, like any other job. Like I remember, working at a TV show, I was really happy there because I could joke around with the executive producer. But, I had a friend who the executive producer didn't really know, and he didn't really like it there. So I don't think it's any different.
I will say too, it's one of the things that is fascinating to me, and you mentioned, just the force looming over the locker room, literally the owner is just such an interesting element because Vince is just Vince, dearly departed, not in the fullest sense, but yeah, it's a little departed in every way, but the last one,
but you know what? Like Vince is still alive, so
you always hear rumors like Vince is going to try and do this or that, so who knows?
It reminds me, like I remember when I went to Cuba, Castro had been dead like 4 or 5 years already. But like when you talk to people there, and I can speak some Spanish, they're always kind of looking over their shoulder like, maybe he's not really dead. Maybe he's going to come back. And I think, as long as I think Vince McMahon is going to have that same energy for a pretty long time.
Yeah, I would say Castro, Elvis, and Vince are the ones that are going to be. Everyone's going to say they're not really dead. They're around the corner. They're right over there. And Hitler, well, which is really sad. But yeah, but I was going to say Tony Khan though in particular is this because I would say when AEW started, in the early years you chronicle in the book, I feel like AEW made a point to be like the Bucks and Omega and Cody, like these are sort of the faces of the company, and then over time became like actually the face of the company is the guy who owns the company, Tony Khan, and like I feel like he stepped up, in ways that are like interesting, and like I mean his on-screen presence, but just being the clear creative force and guy behind AEW has sort of been an interesting twist in the last couple of years, just being like no, this is mine, like I run it, and like you said, I'm maybe learning to book on the job, but relatively successfully, if not very successfully.
Yeah, and like when I spoke to Tony Khan about that, there were certain storylines or certain characters, and I thought, oh well, I was under the impression that Tony Khan just gives these people freedom and they come up with their own stuff. He's a fan like I'm a fan, and Tony Khan was like, wait a second. I mean, I came up with this. Like, I thought about this stuff. Like, I'd mentioned Blake Monroe, the Mariah May, Tony Storm storyline. That was Tony Khan, who watched the movie All About Eve, the classic movie from the early 50s, and came up with that storyline himself. So, yeah, you have to give Tony Khan, he's more than just a wrestling fan who's just letting these guys book on the fly. His fingerprints are all over that product, just like Vince McMahon's fingerprints were all over that product. Some think he's still involved somehow, like we said. But, and I'm going to say this for both of them. Obviously, Tony Khan, he's been in this business, for, say 6 years or so. I mean, he was actually planning it for a bit longer. I see him interact with fans, and he's really great with the fans. I saw Vince, around the time of the first WrestleMania. He was pretty great to a lot of fans too. And back then, Vince McMahon could walk through an airport and, people thought he was a TV announcer and he would stop and chat with people. And, it was a very nice feeling being around that. So sometimes this period of AEW reminds me of that period.
Fascinating too, and I appreciate that in the book you do mention pretty early on, like people thought Tony was a money mark. You get that out of the way nice and quick, like here's the term, here's the perception, and then here obviously he's running a viable business now. So
right, and look, Tony Khan would bring that up himself because Tony Khan, his father, I think was he the wealthiest Pakistani man on earth. I mean, so you're going in, and Chris Jericho said this to me. Everyone thinks, oh, I have $100,000. My grandmother died. I'm going to start a wrestling promotion, and I'm going to make a deal with WBD, and I'm going to have TV every week, and then it's just going to get bigger and bigger. And Chris Jericho said, no, you need billions of dollars to do this. You don't, $100,000 or $2 million isn't going to do it.
Now, we were just talking a little bit about Tony Khan's booking and his ability to book meaningful, memorable storylines. You just cited the Tony Storm example. Like, I mean, just, as a journalist, you're not allowed to necessarily say, I think this was the best, unlike maybe Dave Meltzer does often. But
I don't really editorial.
But I mean, you and I always talk as fans. We were just the other week just talking about our favorite like early memories of AEW the last 6 years. And I'm just curious, like, what are some of your top memories, moments, things that you think will stand out to you when you write about the next 6 years of AEW? Like,
the current stuff.
Yeah.
Like right now, I mean, I'm trying to stay in the current. Like this, and I've said this before, AEW, for the first couple of years, they didn't have their own history. So they had to rely on history that was created before AEW. They'd have to make references to these people's lives before the company existed. But now AEW has its own history. Now, when you look at Darby Allin, you know about his history with Sting and how Darby Allin got to where he is. And, even the Acclaim, they're trying to reconcile, but will they reconcile? Luchasaurus and Jungle Boy Jack Perry, after being estranged, they're back together and they're getting a big pop. The Young Bucks and Kenny Omega being back together. So these are all things that now seem more powerful. And to me, the thing that I find one of the most intriguing storylines is the history between Hangman Adam Page and Swerve Strickland, because on camera they've been such bitter enemies, and now they're united. I mean, Swerve helped Hangman Page initially win the title from Moxley, and then more recently we saw Swerve come to Hangman's aid after he was defeated by Samoa Joe. So where's that going to go? Obviously, if we're only living in this story, both of them want that title, and we know they're competitive and they haven't always loved each other. So when they clash with each other, does it turn as bitter as it was? It just gives you stuff to think about. And to me, that's good storytelling.
Yeah, it's the history and it's the continuity too. They've built a roster that's been around for a while and has that back and forth with each other. So you genuinely, it just feels more lived in and more organic. It's a really nice place to be.
Yeah.
So Keith, I want to say, obviously, AEW, you wrote the book, you covered the first 5 years. Where do you see AEW in the next 5 years? Like, are they going to become like the concern? I think at this point is often, will they? Tony Khan has a lot of money. He doesn't have infinite money. Does a lot of it hinge on a television contract or a streaming contract with one of the weird evil corporations passing services back and forth, and or have they built themselves up to be an entity at this point that can survive?
I don't really know business. It's a good question. would, you think about the heyday of WCW, which, AEW acknowledges that history. They created the national title, which ties to the old NWA. But the heyday of WCW was really those 83 weeks when they were beating WWE. I mean, AEW has been a viable company for far longer than 83 weeks. So I think they've passed through some of the initial storms. That doesn't mean there's not going to be other storms. There always are. And I don't know where the television industry and the streaming industries are going over the next 5 years. So Walt would know more about that than I do in terms of, just observing the business end of it.
I don't know anything.
Yeah, but we don't really know.
So nobody knows.
I do get the impression that Tony Khan is in it for the long haul. I'm backstage. I see the excitement that a lot of the talent has. At least the talent who are talking to me. So I can't tell you what the next 5 years are going to be, but I think the first 5 years have taught us that they're not going to wilt. They're not going to have, a couple of bad months or a bad year and just say, all right, I don't have the heart to remain in this fight. I think the fight is going to continue.
Well, I hope that's the case. And, they hopefully will be the benefactors, too, of our current entertainment landscape in the sense that their ratings are consistently very good. And, no one's ratings are what they used to be when you all were in TV. But it's, right now, it's the best of what's out there. And, I think that's, if they're not WWE levels, well, like you said, they're a spring chicken comparatively. So
I mean, look, WWE is WWE. I don't see Tony Khan getting 2 nights of All In Saudi Arabia in the near future.
Well, that's I hope so for several reasons.
But we don't know, and we don't know what's going on, what Tony Khan has planned. So,
well, we're all going to find out together, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully you get to write a follow-up because that's how we want to hear about it.
I'd like to, yes.
We'd love to read it. The book is literally called This Book is All Elite, the inside story of All Elite Wrestling. It's on bookstores, bookshelves, internet, bookstores, everywhere. Keith Elliot Greenberg, thank you so much. We appreciate it a ton.
Thank you, Steve. Come out to New York more so we can hang out.
I'll be there. I'll tell my son to just chill for a little bit. Daddy will be home if you
just watch some wrestling.
Watch some wrestling. Daddy will watch wrestling. You can watch wrestling and celebrate.
Let the TV be your baby.
Trust me, it's on our to-do list for sure. So